It's no secret that Season 2 of the Fallout show is unfortunately in production and on the way. After how much of a disaster Season 1 was for the lore, not to mention how bad the writing was on its own, it goes without saying that I am not looking forward to Season 2 and what further damage it will do to the series, especially given the fact that much of Season 2 appears to take place in the New Vegas area, including Novak in the Strip itself. If the first season is anything to go by, it is not at all unreasonable to expect an absolute tidal wave of retcons, absurd nonsense bullshit, bad writing, complete disrespect for everything that came before it, and wacky stupid for the sake of wacky stupid. And based on some leaked set photos, as well as a statement by Todd Howard, I have every reason to believe Season 2 will be even worse than the first. As a quick recap for anyone out of the loop, Season 1 made massive sweeping retcons, such as ghouls needing Zombrex to not go feral. Power armor now has a weakness that allows you to one-shot anyone wearing it. Shady Sands is now where the Boneyard should be, and it was also destroyed in 2277, before the events of New Vegas. And no, I'm not interested in hearing your cope defenses. If you can't admit they fucked up, that's your problem. They absolutely made it so it was destroyed in 2277, and there's a lot of evidence within the show to prove it. Additionally, the Brotherhood is now a full-on religious cult complete with branding. The show also implies that the events of Fallout 1 never happened, for the fact that there's 4 vaults in the Los Angeles area that were never attacked by the Master. In fact, there's no indication the Master ever existed in any way. We see a glimpse of a super mutant Zarm at the Enclave base, but Bethesda has so many origin stories for super mutants in each of its games that this means nothing anymore. The reason Vault 13 survived as long as it did is because it was hidden in a cave and they didn't know it was there. But in Los Angeles, there's 2, technically 4 vaults, just sitting out in the open and he never cracked them, thus implying Fallout 1 never happened. These are just a few retcons or nonsense massive lore changes made by the show, and I'd be here for hours if I were to go through all of them in depth. Further, the show has amazing examples of quality writing, such as a necrotic rotting finger being grafted to someone's hand, as if it's no problem and won't fucking kill them from sepsis. A character working as a shitter, he was fed a lot of food, so he would shit and the shit would attract flies, which were then used for food. Or Lucy being exiled from Vault 4, where the Overseer expects her to die immediately upon reaching the surface, yet giving her 2 weeks' supplies, and this is despite the fact that they have scavenging teams, and from their perspective, Lucy came from the surface in the first place. And who could forget the wonderful plot of capitalists wanting to wipe out the competition to win the game of capitalism, yet inviting their competition to survive the bombs meant to wipe out the competition, and making vaults and giving dozens of them Gex so they could survive in the post-apocalypse, therefore becoming new competition that Vault-Tec would need to nuke. Hell, even the core theme of the series, represented in the line, "War never changes," was retconned to be nothing more than a marketing pitch to sell the apocalypse to Vault-Tec's competition. To say Season 1 has problems is an understatement. As such, it's my base expectation that Season 2 won't be good either, and this is only supported by the leaked set and prop photos and the statement by Todd Howard that I mentioned earlier, which is what I'm talking about today. Starting off with Todd's statement.
And obviously Season 2 is going to be featuring some of New Vegas, and we're careful about, maintaining the key events of that game and the great content in it. It is obviously difficult to deal with when you're going back to an area where a game had multiple endings.
Yep.
We have some answers there, but it's hard. It is, I'll just admit, everybody realizes it's hard to sort of canonize or say this is exactly how that game ended. And so whenever we can, I like to avoid it. Like, don't refute anything that happened. Be careful when you're specific about what happened. Just like, we want that game and what the players did to be their reality and true.
We're already off to an absolutely disastrous start. It's already dead in the water. More importantly, it once again speaks to Todd and Bethesda's complete and total lack of understanding of Fallout. Remember, this is a game series about choice and consequence. It's about the world rebuilding in the post-nuclear apocalypse. Nothing should be stagnant. By setting Season 2 in the Mojave Wasteland, you'll be confirming or denying certain endings and outcomes by default. Because in showing these parts of the world, at best we'll be able to tell how things played out, and at worst, the show will imply certain events to have never happened at all. For an easy example, we know that the Las Vegas Strip appears in Season 2, and by showing us that there's no Legion banners or troops there, it by default confirms the Legion ending is non-canon. Now the show obviously won't show every location or companion from the game, but fact is the show will be telling us how some things played out whether they intend to or not, much like they did in Season 1. If the intent is to specifically not confirm any particular ending, the implication is that they didn't happen at all, which is antithetical to both Fallout and the very idea of storytelling itself. For another example, let's take a look at Jacobstown. The show likely won't visit there, but this is a hypothetical. If Lily is still there, if the Nightkin are still there, if Dr. Henry is still there, and there's no significant change, the town hasn't grown, been destroyed or abandoned, or even changed demographics at all, then the implication is that nothing has happened. It's just stagnated when it shouldn't. It's been in stasis for 15 years when that makes no sense. It should be increasingly obvious why trying to not confirm anything one way or the other is going to cause problems. Another issue that could arise from this is either that none of the endings in the game are true for certain groups, characters, or factions, or alternatively, the show might confirm mutually exclusive contradictory endings as being true. For example, the ending of the Fiends if you kill all their leaders implies they cease to be a faction, yet Season 1 showed us Fiends as far as the Boneyard or Shady Sands 15 years later. This is one of the big problems with Bethesda. They don't want to deal with any difficult questions or having to write any particular choices being canon when it is their job. This might be why all the choices in Fallout 3 are simple, blatantly good versus evil options, and why the only choice in Fallout 4 was with which faction you sided with. No nuance to any of it. You're making a sequel to, or a continuation of, a series all about difficult choices, consequences, and the world growing and changing. You're going to have to decide what is canon and what isn't. Doing nothing at all is worse than confirming an ending that might not be popular, because you're not only cutting yourself off of further storytelling opportunities, you're not only going to be showing these events to have never happened, or to have played out in a way you don't intend, but worse, you're effectively saying that it didn't matter enough to ever answer. What's worse is that we've already seen this in action in Season 1. I talked about it in my breakdown of the Fallout show, and I'll do it again here. Season 1 pulled the Supreme Leader Snoke on the NCR in Shady Sands. Nuking Shady Sands and showing the NCR to have no presence in the heart of their own territory cuts off all the storytelling potential they had with nothing to replace it with, and it was done specifically to destroy any progress that had been made in the world, to keep it as a perpetual apocalypse wasteland. Rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of how and why the NCR either failed or survived as a nation, it just got randomly deleted off screen for no good reason, and due to no actual fault of their own. Remember too that Fallout is all about what people do in the apocalypse. How the NCR was dealt with was important. To randomly destroy it like this would be like destroying the Empire in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It's like breaking up the Avengers after Age of Ultron and never getting Civil War. All of the potential and meaning it had was just erased for no good reason. Everything it was leading to is gone, and what it was building up is now pointless and irrelevant, because rather than ever delving into that story, it was all just randomly destroyed by a literal cuck. There is very good reason to be wary of Season 2, especially given the fact that the quick teaser shot we got of the city at the end of Season 1 seemed to portray it in a poor state, looking dead and damaged, with no lights on, further backed up immediately by the end credits featuring a destroyed Vegas Strip, heavily implying its destruction, and this seems to be confirmed by leaked set photos. There's 3 states the Strip appears to be in: pre-war, post-war as we saw in New Vegas, and a further ravaged and heavily damaged version after New Vegas. While it is unclear what state the strip will be in at the start of the show, it will see heavy damage regardless by the end of the season. None of this bodes well for Season 2, as it implies a lack of respect for the source material. Now, I did first see many of these screenshots from Oxhorn's video, and I genuinely mean no offense to him when I say this, but it seems to me like he's coping a bit when he suggests the idea that the strip is in a worse state only after Lucy visits it, and that the strip will be as we know it in-game, then get wrecked by the end of the season. While this is a possibility, I do not think it is likely based on the evidence mentioned, showing Vegas to already be in a bad state. It really feels like the people making the decisions here are just taking an axe to everything that had been built by the originals in New Vegas. Shady Sands? Gone. Nuked by a cuck off screen and moved to a different location for no good reason. NCR? Appears to not even exist anymore based on Season 1. No presence in the heart of their own territory. New factions and unaffiliated towns are being formed, with no mention of the NCR outside of Moldaver's group. The Brotherhood? Turned into an actual fanatical religious cult when they've never been full-on religious even at their worst in the mainline games. Then there's the dozens of retcons it would take too long to list. Now, some of the first things we're seeing of Season 2 is that Vegas appears to be in ruins. Now, some bad faith actors will misconstrue this as being against change, despite the fact that any new entry into the series would inherently have change by default. We want to see the world grow and change and evolve. The problem is the utter lack of respect for the source material, the lack of care, the lack of reverence, the lack of sincerity. You can destroy Shady Sands, and the NCR, and New Vegas, and everything else in the setting, but it needs to make sense. It needs to be consistent. It needs to fit in with the world and the story being told, and it needs to not be undermined by a lazy, unfunny joke. While we're learning about why Shady Sands was destroyed, we keep cutting back to Bud the Retarded Roomba's wacky adventures. The fall of Shady Sands and the NCR doesn't push the story forward because their fall had nothing to do with them as a faction, and resets all the progress made back to zero. This is the opposite of pushing the world forward. The writers could have set the show anywhere, but specifically picked the one part of the world that had an established government that they then specifically decided to destroy on a whim, so they could have a Wild West wasteland when they have an entire country worth of places they could have set it in. To go from that to seeing New Vegas being wrecked really makes it seem like they're just intentionally destroying everything for the sake of it, rather than for any genuine storytelling purpose to push the world forward. They're grabbing the iconography we all know and recognize to use as nostalgia bait, then smashing it with a fucking hammer, or changing it to be something completely different, and I'm fucking sick of it. I won't deny the slim possibility that maybe they'll write it well, in a way that makes sense, in a way that doesn't break pre-established lore, but after Season 1, I've got no reason whatsoever to give them the benefit of the doubt, and expect anything but the worst. This is not like The Mandalorian, where the first season is generally accepted by fans as being decent, despite its many problems, and then went downhill from there. Imagine there was no first season of The Mandalorian, and that is where we currently are, with fans of the IP pointing only to member berries and special effects, while trying to ignore or hand-wave away plot holes and retcons, desperate to keep feeling good about a franchise that was already collapsing around them. There are people genuinely mad that Season 2 of The Acolyte was cancelled because the finale teased Darth Plagueis, so they won't get to see the thing they know in the second season. This leads me to the final thing I'm here to talk about today, and that is this abomination. I made a tweet about this a few days ago that popped off pretty hard and pissed off a lot of people, so I've got some counter-arguments to address on this one. In fact, the most interesting thing about this tweet is just how many fucking tourists it revealed.
Getting real tired of tourist season.
Before I deal with that, though, I should explain what the problem is in the first place. It is very common in long-running franchises to see some of its most well-known aspects, its iconography, to essentially be mined and spammed for the sake of nostalgia. To take something the fan base recognizes, and to shove it into your new product in hopes that fans will latch onto that iconography, with little thought for what's going on around it.
Red. That's red.
Liv.
He vatored! He vatored!
In fact, this is very common with modern Star Wars, with various cameo-of-the-day episodes of shows and nonsense callbacks. One of the worst examples was with the Solo movie, which infamously gives a backstory to how Han Solo got his last name.
What's your name, son?
Han.
What? Who are your people?
I don't have people. I'm alone.
Solo?
And ends with Darth Maul standing up and igniting his lightsaber for no reason. The film also had a reference to Minox because Han encountered them in the OT, among plenty of other ham-fisted and out-of-place references and callbacks to the OT, such as a dumb reference to a thermal grenade used as a threat, similar to the original, but turned into a dumb joke.
This is a thermal detonator that I just armed.
That's a rock. And you just made a clicking sound with your mouth.
Point is that a lot of people are easily sold and can be blinded by the iconic imagery that they know and love, while paying no attention to the writing surrounding it. In fact, there may not be a greater example than Season 1 of Fallout and Bethesda Fallout in general for that matter. We had bobbleheads, junk jet, laser guns, vertibirds, power armor, Brotherhood of Steel, caps, Nuka-Cola, hacking minigame, jet, Vault-Tec being nefarious and doing experiments, references to side quests, Assaultrons, Mr. Handies, 10mm pistol, Stimpaks, Fiends, Dogmeat, storytelling skeletons, the Enclave, and so forth.
I clapped when I saw it!
It broke new ground! I know what that is! Oh my god!
I've even had someone reference things like this as an example of why the writing for the show is good. All of this is very much superficial and easy to do. It takes little work to make a prop that looks accurate to the games, or to make a lame joke about being distracted by side quests, whereas it takes a great deal more effort and talent to write an engaging story that is both good on its own and respectful and accurate to the source material. A story that dives into the ideas and themes of Fallout, rather than treating them as a little more than set dressing or bastardized for cheap emotional shock value. So when I see a Ranger helmet on power armor, it seems obvious what the intent behind its creation is. It's to get people on Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube to soy-pog at it without a second thought. It's basic bitch nostalgia bait. It's like throwing Darth Vader into something.
Red. That's red.
Because you know the mindless fanboys are going to immediately jizz themselves because they get to see something they know and recognize, regardless of how little sense it actually makes.
Have you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?
It also speaks to just how lazy and uncreative Bethesda and the showrunners have gotten. Rather than trying to do anything unique and interesting, rather than pushing the story and the world farther, rather than creating something new, the exact thing I've been accused of being against, by the way, rather than treating the originals with any kind of respect, we get this bizarre, unnecessary nonsense mashup of two things that should have remained separate, rather than playing to nostalgia in a lame attempt at the rule of cool. Part of what made the Ranger armor or riot gear so fucking cool in the first place is that it wasn't another set of power armor. It was proof you can make new types of armor for the setting that look really cool on their own, without needing to copy or rehash the things we had seen before in droves. That you can do new things in the setting, rather than just relying on the most iconic elements of the original games, and making variations of them. But no, riot gear can't just be riot gear. No, now we need a power armor variation, because Bethesda and Amazon are creatively bankrupt. The ironic thing is the fact that I've been accused of not wanting new things in Fallout for criticizing this, when part of the problem is the specific fact that this is not a new thing, but two things we've already seen senselessly combined. As to why this makes no sense, it's pretty straightforward. First of all, the grade of armor between riot gear and fucking power armor are going to be worlds apart. Power armor is military equipment made to fight on the front lines. It is a top tier of defensive armor. It turns you into a walking tank. Whereas riot gear is designed for civilian riots. It would be like arming your average frontline soldier with a shotgun and a taser. It just makes no sense to combine these different levels of gear with different intended purposes. Secondly, the point of rangers is to be agile and stealthy. Equipping them with a walking tank suit is the antithesis of that. It would be like putting a scout or an archer in heavy full-plate armor in medieval conflicts. And also, just on a final side note before I get to the counter-arguments, it just looks ugly and out of place. It looks as though it has been scaled up to fit on a power armor model and modified to justify its pairing with power armor, but that only serves to highlight just how forced and out of place this is. There's no reason why it should look like this, because it also devalues the unique look of the NCR Rangers, who would want to keep their signature look unique to themselves, so people know who they are at a glance. Anyways, this section is here because more than anything else, my tweet acted, unintentionally, as a trap, revealing how many people are either tourists or illiterate. I received plenty of replies to this tweet, with the vast majority of them showing themselves to not know or understand the lore, and not even understanding what my complaint was. I think it's worth talking about these counter-arguments to further explain why this power armor doesn't make sense. One of the most common responses to this tweet was to show these two images, which I've now seen so many times that I can perfectly visualize them in my mind at a moment's notice, so thank you for that. In addition, people made the argument directly that the NCR has power armor. This strikes me as people who didn't pay attention, or people who looked it up on a wiki. All the power armor you see the NCR have, with the exception of one single set added in a DLC, are non-functional. They're power armor without the power.
They have the best equipment the NCR can get its hands on. Power armor salvaged from our war with the Brotherhood. Techs strip out the joint servos so you don't need special training to wear it. It feels like you're carrying a Brahmin on your back, but it can take a heck of a lot of punishment.
This is reflected in both the stats and how it even functions in combat. Normal power armor has a metal clang sound, and sparks shooting from it when hit.
Whoa, 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 careful!
Like that?
Whereas salvaged power armor uses normal blood decals and doesn't make the clanging noise. Normal power armor also gives +1 to strength, whereas salvaged power armor gives a -2 to agility, to represent how bulky it is and how it weighs down the user. They are literally just wearing the armor plates of power armor without all the internal bits that make it power armor. In short, the NCR doesn't use functional power armor because they can't. No one has the training for it. See, one of the few good changes Bethesda made with Fallout 3 was the introduction of power armor training being necessary for using it. In practice, this was a little more than a barrier that would be removed at a point Bethesda deemed it okay for you to use power armor, through the Anchorage DLC, by reaching the last quest in the main story, or by requesting power armor training as soon as you reach the Citadel. It makes sense that a mechanized armor suit would require training to safely operate. Going into New Vegas, Obsidian built upon this and incorporated it into their lore, and is much more significant than one might think. The Brotherhood NCR war accomplishes two things. Well, it accomplishes many, but only two that are relevant right now. First of all, it tells us that having the best equipment doesn't matter when you're outnumbered by a factor of 10. The NCR won and drove the Brotherhood into hiding, because despite having inferior equipment, they had the raw numbers to overwhelm the Brotherhood, despite their staggering technological advantage. But secondly, and most importantly, the NCR having full access to power armor combined with their sheer numbers would make them an unstoppable force. The Legion, who they're losing a war to and are being outmaneuvered by constantly, would have been far less of a threat to the NCR. Rather than there being a first battle of Hoover Dam, there would have simply been the Battle of Hoover Dam, which the NCR would have handily won, without retreat or trickery involved. The Legion still would have been a threat, but one that would have only given the NCR a black eye, as if they would have the numbers and the tech to fully resist the Legion, with far fewer casualties, maybe even going so far as to push into Legion territory. In short, NCR in control of power armor they can use would have completely changed the dynamic of just not all of New Vegas, but their strength and standing in general. In fact, the NCR, who desperately want control of the Las Vegas Strip, might even be willing to go toe-to-toe with House's robot army, especially if he hasn't activated them yet with the Platinum chip. He'd be outgunned in a way he can't manage. Them having access to fully functional power armor completely changes the game. Now of course, Fallout 4 went ahead and retconned power armor training, so now just anyone can hop into a suit and immediately become a walking tank at a moment's notice. The introduction of power armor training in Fallout 3 is a rare case of a retcon actually making sense and being a good change. New Vegas built upon that in a significant way, only for Fallout 4 to pull the rug out from under them, and by extension making the NCR's lack of ability to use it nonsense within the new lore. Because if a pre-war lawyer who has never seen combat can get into a suit and immediately get in a fist fight with a Deathclaw, then why would the NCR tear the servos out and make their soldiers wear the less effective plate of power armor unsupported by the frame and weighing them down? Why would the NCR not use highly effective equipment and instead go out of their way to make it less effective, then hand it out to their frontline troops? It also makes sense why they wouldn't have the training. The Brotherhood and the Enclave kept it a close secret. Why would any captured member of the Brotherhood help give the NCR an advantage over their own faction when they were at war? Either way, this very much strikes me as people seeing power armor and just assuming it's normal power armor when it's anything but, while also not paying attention to the lore or the context clues around them. Now I know I have to address the elephant in the room, and that is the Scorched Sierra power armor, because it will inevitably be brought up and hailed as the ultimate proof that I'm wrong, and the NCR totally has access to working power armor and people who know how to use it. Honestly, I hate this stupid lore-breaking piece of shit armor, and I believe it's a genuine fuck-up by Obsidian. Consider for a moment all the world building and writing that went into the salvaged power armor being the way it is, non-functional. The lore of why they had to do that, and most importantly, why the NCR would use broken shit power armor as opposed to using real power armor, and compare that to the fact that the Scorched Sierra power armor just exists on its own with no lore behind it, and it's just kind of there. Now unfortunately, this one fuck-up lore-breaking exception will be used by people to dismiss the entirety of the lore of salvaged power armor and why it exists, by bad faith actors. But it should be obvious to any reasonable person why one lore-breaking exception shouldn't nullify the far greater amount of lore and information that explain that the NCR can't use power armor. It's worth mentioning too, that this isn't even a new set of power armor, but one that had some cosmetics added, such as the bear's head. There's nothing to indicate or even imply that the NCR has the ability to rebuild, or even manufacture power armor. Also, if you can broker an alliance between the NCR and the Brotherhood, the NCR will even return the salvaged power armor to them. Oh, and by the way, a quick side note, and this plays into the lack of basic literacy a lot of people who responded seem to have. My initial complaint wasn't even in the fact that the NCR had power armor, and yet I got spammed by people showing me pictures of salvaged power armor, proving both that they can't read and that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. On top of which, while a lot of people keep insisting this is a version of T-45 or T-51B, or even T-60 power armor, side-by-side comparisons show it's literally none of these. In fact, no part of this armor matches any other part of any other power armor from any other Fallout entry ever. This stuff is in fact completely new, for no reason. In a previous Fallout video I made, I once sarcastically remarked on how Bethesda keeps introducing new sets of power armor, despite T-51B having been described as the pre-war pinnacle, and despite the high-tech scientists of the Enclave taking well over a century to develop their first new sets of armor post-war. I suggested that we might one day see power armor that was introduced just minutes before the bombs dropped. Well, now we have a brand new set of NCR power armor, dropping barely in time for the NCR itself to be annihilated, immediately after the events of New Vegas, according to Todd Howard, just so it could appear in the show. Sometimes I hate being right, especially when I wasn't trying to be. Moving along, the second most common counter-argument is that the NCR should be able to make their own power armor, because it's been 15 years since New Vegas, and apparently that's enough time for them to figure it out. First and foremost, if we go with Todd Howard's lame attempt at fixing the show's lore problem, then the NCR was effectively destroyed 2 years after New Vegas, meaning no, they didn't have 15 years since New Vegas, they had 2 at most. Further, their capital is said to have fallen in 2277, implying the NCR as a whole to be in trouble, again casting doubt on their ability to accomplish cracking power armor when no one besides the Enclave have at this point. Regardless of Todd's cope, the show absolutely portrays that Shady Sands was destroyed before the events of New Vegas, which only exacerbates the problem. As mentioned a moment ago, this looks like an entirely new set of power armor, as it doesn't resemble any we've seen in the past. The only post-war power armor we've seen up until this point was Advanced Power Armor, also known as Enclave Power Armor, and retconned into Exo-1 Power Armor as of Fallout 4, and further retconned by base game Fallout 4 and its DLC Nuka World into being pre-war as well. Ignoring Fallout 4's pointless, lazy retcons, the Enclave have been the only faction shown to be able to produce power armor after the war, and even then, they don't have enough of it to equip all of their troops with it. If the NCR hasn't cracked power armor after controlling Navarro for 40 years, it's extremely doubtful they'd be able to in the following 2 years maximum, before the faction is effectively destroyed. Even before the apocalypse, China had not figured out how to make power armor. All of this combined paints a pretty clear picture that creating power armor is either very difficult, or requires rare resources unavailable to most groups in the wasteland. This isn't something a faction should just be able to do. There has to be a really good explanation for why a faction might be able to make power armor, and there's maybe only 1 or 2 explanations that would make sense for the NCR, but even then it's a stretch, especially given how much time has passed. If they had the blueprints from Navarro, why couldn't they do it in the 40 years between Fallout 2 and New Vegas? If they didn't have the blueprints, then how did they do it? The answer from people defending this seems to be nothing more than pointing out that time has passed, therefore it's apparently just a natural conclusion that they were able to do it, not between the events of Fallout 2 and New Vegas, but between New Vegas and the show, which, as a reminder, going by Todd Howard's attempt at fixing the show's fuck-up, for the vast amount of that time the NCR has been destroyed or close to it. Further, I've seen people unironically make the argument that if raiders can make power armor, then the NCR should be able to as well. These people seem to have no concept of scale or even basic context. Raider power armor is literally random bits of scrap metal welded together and mounted to a power armor frame. Acting as though that's even comparable to real power armor is either disingenuous or idiotic. The point of power armor is that it is highly advanced armor that is so cumbersome that it requires mechanical components to function and be able to move, turning the user into a walking tank. This is not simply Kevlar or steel plating, but a fictional composite material that can absorb the impact of a low-caliber bullet. Comparing the two is like comparing a go-kart to a tank. All of this just goes to show how far Bethesda defenders are willing to stretch to try and defend Bethesda constantly fucking the series into the dirt. Those were the 2 most common responses I saw. Most of the rest consisted of a lot of insults, impotent anger, people saying I should just shut up and enjoy it.
Don't ask questions, just consume product and then get excited for next product.
And people saying that it's cool so it doesn't matter. I suspect that was part of the original intent too. Play to the rule of cool, so mindless fanboys will freak out over it because unfortunately, jangling keys is super effective, and that's the kind of thing that will get such people hyped for the show. Like many other fandoms surrounding large and well-known series, there's an issue of toxic positivity, and I'd argue that Fallout is among the worst in this regard. There's a lot of people who seem to just want to feel good about the thing they like with no critical thinking. While that's fine on its own, the problem arises with how many of these people react to criticism of that thing. Their enjoyment not only exists within a bubble, but requires it to prevent them from being aware of any problems that might exist. Being made aware of a problem you can't square away will cause dissonance. You'll realize it doesn't make sense, and worse, you'll be in danger of realizing more and more problems that exist, causing the whole facade to crumble, bursting your bubble. Therefore, anyone who does talk about or point out those problems is endangering the bubble, so naturally they need to be silenced. They're just haters. They won't let people have fun. They won't let people enjoy things. They're the problem. Criticize Bethesda Fallout and these kinds of people will come out in droves to shout you down and tell you how much of a loser you are, and how what you say is stupid and wrong and doesn't matter. In fact, they'll call you a toxic New Vegas fanboy, all the while insulting you and even threatening you, all because you had the audacity to criticize the thing they like. The constant accusations about New Vegas fans being toxic is probably one of the biggest examples of mass gaslighting and projection on the internet in recent years. Outside of politics, Bethesda fans are some of the most hateful, aggressive, and quick to anger people I've had to deal with on the internet. All of it comes from a place of insecurity, viewing any criticism as an attack on the thing they like, therefore an attack on them and their enjoyment, and the only response they've got is to lash out. But criticizing these things is important if we ever want to see change. Fallout is very much on the same trajectory as Star Wars is. You had a set of movies that are absolutely beloved. You had the prequels, which were rightfully criticized for their vast amount of problems. Then you have the Disney era, which has been in near constant decline with each movie, then show, getting worse and worse, with the exception of Season 1 of Andor. Each new entry mining iconography and using them to support casts of underwhelming characters and lackluster plot lines, filled to the brim with bad writing, retcons, plot holes, and lame payoffs, and ruining beloved characters. Even normies have their limits, and a core audience of die-hard fans who will accept and praise anything is not enough to support an entire franchise. Fallout will have its own acolyte levels of cringe-embarrassing failure one day. It's only a matter of time. Got a bit off topic there, but I felt it needed to be said. All in all, I feel largely the same way I did about Season 1 prior to its release. From the initial announcement to the final trailer, everything I heard at best just did not inspire confidence, and at worst, only made me feel dread. From the early article saying it was a funny, wacky gonzo adventure, to another article describing the Brotherhood as a religious Knights Templar type group, to the now infamous shot of Lucy and Maximus standing in front of the crater that was once Shady Sands. There was every warning sign prior to release that Season 1 was going to be bad, and it was worse than I could have imagined. We are now in the same situation, following the same trend, and seeing and learning things about Season 2 that are indicative of how they're going to continue treating this series. Fallout was largely about choice and morality, about people surviving in the post-apocalypse, with different factions vying for power and control. It was a world that told good stories and had depth. Now Fallout is a little more than a brand. As I mentioned earlier, it's very much like Star Wars, a franchise that has been rendered down to its base elements with none of the depth, nuance, or intelligent writing it once had in the past. All that's left is the marketable iconography, the things people can mindlessly point to and cream their jorts and excitement at, because they see something they like and recognize regardless of how little sense it makes. Who needs depth or substance when you have power armor and Nuka-Cola and vaguely cool looking things happening? Isn't it so fucking cool how the ghoul kills 3 power armored Brotherhood Knights without effort because of a suddenly invented weakness and because they can't shoot and are too stupid to turn their flashlights on in the dark? Fallout has become a zombie franchise like so many others, something perpetuated purely for profit over having any genuine interest in the setting. Todd Howard's legacy won't be one of having saved Fallout from obscurity, but having taken it, stripped out everything about it that made it good, ruining it and destroying it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Fallout has become a parody of itself. Fallout is what it looks like when an entire franchise gets flanderized. This is the legacy of Todd Howard and ML Pagliarillo, and Season 2 will just be another example of why. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I've always got new videos in the works and I stream often. And I will absolutely be covering Season 2 of Fallout, no matter how bad it gets.